In the bustling, music-infused heart of Nashville, nestled within the modest confines of a small, well-worn apartment, lived Chloe, a 10-year-old girl with a quiet spirit and an even quieter voice. Her world revolved around her father, Mark, a man whose hands were calloused from relentless work, a testament to his unwavering dedication as a single dad. Mark toiled away at 2 jobs, one during the day and another, a night shift at a diner, just to ensure Chloe had everything she needed and a little more. Their days were a rhythmic dance of routine and resilience, punctuated by the faint, sometimes melancholic melodies that occasionally escaped Chloe's lips. Chloe possessed a natural, almost ethereal talent for music. While she helped her father with chores, her small frame moving diligently through their compact living space, she would hum intricate tunes, her voice a soft whisper that barely disturbed the air. She'd sing, not for an audience, but for herself, her melodies a secret garden she tended with care. Yet, despite this innate gift, Chloe was cripplingly shy, her insecurity a thick veil over her extraordinary ability. Mark, ever the gentle observer, noticed her burgeoning talent. He'd offer a soft, encouraging smile, perhaps a quiet compliment, but he never pushed. He understood the delicate nature of her gift, knowing that true artistry blossomed at its own pace, on its own terms. As the golden Nashville autumn began to paint the trees, the local elementary school buzzed with the annual announcement of its much-anticipated talent show. Flyers adorned the hallways, their vibrant colors promising a spectacle of youthful creativity. Chloe, usually indifferent to such public displays, felt a faint flicker of interest. She saw the poster, her eyes lingering on the image of a child singing on stage, a spotlight catching their face. But the thought of performing, of being seen, was enough to send a shiver of apprehension down her spine. She quickly dismissed the idea, shaking her head subtly when Mark, ever hopeful, gently suggested she might consider singing. "It's just for fun, sweetie," he'd said. But her shy retreat was instant and absolute. Then came the bombshell. The school principal, a woman with an air of theatrical flair, made a grand announcement over the PA system that reverberated through every classroom. This year, the talent show would feature a very special guest judge, none other than Julian Thorne, the celebrated pop star whose catchy tunes dominated the airwaves. Julian Thorne was a household name, known for his chart-topping hits, his flamboyant stage presence, and, it must be admitted, his occasionally arrogant public persona, a trait often highlighted in tabloids and gossip columns. The news of Julian Thorne's involvement intensified Chloe's reluctance. The idea of singing in front of anyone was daunting enough, but a famous pop star? That was an entirely different league of terrifying. Her hands would clam up, her throat would tighten at the mere thought. Mark, sensing her renewed apprehension, tried to reassure her. "It's just for fun, Chloe Bug," he'd say, using his special nickname for her, his voice a warm balm. "Your voice is beautiful, no matter who's listening. It's about sharing your gift, not impressing anyone." He knew the profound joy music brought her, even in private. Slowly, carefully, he managed to coax her into considering a small part, a blend into the background in the school choir's group performance. It was a compromise, a tiny step onto a much larger stage. With a heart thumping like a frantic bird, Chloe reluctantly attended the choir auditions. The music teacher, Mrs. Davis, a woman with kind eyes and an uncanny ability to spot raw talent, led the session. Chloe, true to form, sang barely above a whisper, her voice almost lost in the general din of other children's enthusiastic if sometimes off-key efforts. Yet, even through the softest delivery, Mrs. Davis immediately recognized the exceptional quality of Chloe's voice. It had an ethereal purity, a clarity that cut through the noise, a natural vibrato that hinted at immense untapped potential. Mrs. Davis, usually reserved in her praise, was visibly impressed. She gave Chloe a warm smile, a look that conveyed a deeper understanding. After the audition, as the other children bustled out, Mrs. Davis called Chloe aside. Her voice was gentle, encouraging. She spoke directly to Chloe, acknowledging her shyness but also her undeniable gift. "Chloe," she began, "your voice is truly special. Have you ever considered a solo performance?" The words hung in the air, heavy with possibility and dread. Chloe's eyes widened, a wave of panic washing over her. Her face went pale, and she shook her head vehemently, a silent, absolute refusal. Mrs. Davis, understanding the depth of the child's fear, did not push. She simply nodded, respecting Chloe's decision. But as Chloe hurried away, Mrs. Davis watched her go, a thoughtful expression on her face. She knew talent when she heard it, and she had a feeling this wouldn't be the last time she'd hear Chloe's remarkable voice. The talent show was still weeks away, and Mrs. Davis had a quiet resolve to see Chloe's potential fully realized, even if Chloe herself wasn't ready to embrace it. Mark's own journey into the world of music had begun many years before, a vibrant, hopeful chapter that now felt like a distant dream. In his younger days, he was a talented musician, his fingers dancing across guitar strings with an innate grace, his voice a soulful baritone that held the raw promise of Nashville stardom. He'd spent countless nights playing in smoky local bars, the scent of stale beer and ambition hanging heavy in the air, his heart fueled by the dream of making it big. He wrote his own songs, melodies born from his experiences, lyrics etched with his aspirations. Nashville, the beating heart of country music, had drawn him in, a siren song promising fame and artistic fulfillment. It was in one of those very bars, amidst the clinking glasses and raucous laughter, that he first met Sarah. She was a vision, her eyes sparkling with an inner light, her smile a warm invitation. Sarah, too, was an aspiring singer, her voice a sweet counterpoint to Mark's more rugged tones. They fell in love quickly, deeply, their shared passion for music weaving an unbreakable bond between them. Their days were filled with harmonies, their nights with shared dreams. They would sit for hours, guitars in hand, writing songs together, their voices blending seamlessly, creating a tapestry of sound that was uniquely theirs. They envisioned a future where their music would touch hearts, where their names would be known, where their love story would be sung for all to hear. The early years were a struggle, a familiar tune for most aspiring artists in Nashville. Financial woes were a constant companion, but their love and their music provided a rich currency that transcended monetary value. They lived on ramen noodles and dreams, believing that their breakthrough was just around the corner. Every open mic night, every small gig, every songwriting session was a step closer to their shared destiny. They were happy, despite the hardships, buoyed by the unwavering belief in their talent and in each other. Then, just as their futures seemed to shimmer within reach, life dealt a cruel blow. Sarah became ill shortly after Chloe was born. The joy of new parenthood was overshadowed by a creeping dread. The illness was sudden, aggressive, a relentless force that quickly began to steal her vitality. Mark watched, helpless, as the woman he loved, the mother of his child, began to fade. His music career, once the driving force of his life, was abruptly put on hold. The guitar, once an extension of his soul, became a silent sentinel, gathering dust in the corner of their small apartment. His dreams, once so vivid, receded into the background, replaced by a singular, all-consuming mission to care for Sarah and Chloe. He took on any job he could find, no matter how menial or exhausting. Diner shifts, construction work, late-night cleaning gigs. He did it all, his hands growing rougher, his back aching, his spirit weary, but resolute. Every dollar earned went towards medical bills, towards providing for his family, towards buying Sarah a moment of comfort. The melodies in his heart were replaced by the rhythmic thud of his own exhaustion, the harmonies by the quiet hum of the hospital machines. Sarah passed away when Chloe was just 3 years old. The loss was devastating, a gaping wound in Mark's soul that time could never fully heal. He felt as if a part of him had died with her, the music in him silenced, replaced by a profound grief. In the aftermath, he made a silent vow, a solemn promise to his departed love and to himself. He would give Chloe the best life possible, even if it meant burying his own dreams forever. He would be her rock, her protector, her everything. Chloe grew up in the shadow of this quiet sacrifice, her early years filled with stories of her mom's beautiful voice, often told by a wistful Mark, and tales of her dad's own musical talent, recounted by old friends who occasionally visited. She inherited their love for music, a genetic predisposition woven into the fabric of her being. But she also inherited their sensitivity, a delicate emotional landscape that made her wary of the harsh glare of the spotlight. Mark, remembering his own struggles and Sarah's quiet strength, never pressured Chloe into music. He wanted her to find her own path, to discover her own voice on her own terms, without the weight of his unfulfilled ambitions or her mother's legacy. He simply provided the fertile ground for her passion to grow, should she choose to cultivate it. Meanwhile, a parallel story unfolded, one that would inevitably intersect with theirs. Julian Thorne, the famous pop star, was a contemporary of Mark and Sarah. They had all moved to Nashville around the same time, chasing similar dreams. But their paths diverged sharply. Julian was always fiercely ambitious, driven by an insatiable hunger for fame. He was known to be ruthless, sometimes stepping on others to get ahead, his charm a thin veneer over a core of calculating self-interest. He eventually secured a record deal, his star rising rapidly, leaving his past struggles and, more importantly, the people he'd left behind, in the dust. Mark and Sarah had a few brief, not-so-friendly encounters with Julian in their early days in Nashville. Julian had always seemed to look down on them, dismissing their talent with a sneer, seeing them as mere obstacles in his relentless ascent to the top. He was the antithesis of their humble, heartfelt approach to music. A stark contrast that would soon cast a long shadow over Chloe's budding talent. As the school talent show drew nearer, Chloe found herself increasingly immersed in the preparations with the choir. Despite her persistent shyness, her voice, a clear, pure instrument, began to shine through during rehearsals. Her classmates, initially surprised by the quiet girl's vocal prowess, started to exchange impressed glances. Chloe, however, remained mostly in her own world, her gaze fixed on the music sheet, meticulously hitting every note. Her presence in the group, a comforting shield against the terrifying prospect of individual attention. Mrs. Davis, her gentle persistence undiminished, continued her subtle campaign to convince Chloe to sing a solo. She would approach Chloe after rehearsals, her voice soft and encouraging, explaining with genuine warmth that Chloe's voice wasn't just good, it was truly special, a gift that deserved to be heard. She spoke of the magic Chloe created when she sang, how it touched something deep within the listener. But each time, Chloe would politely but firmly refuse. Her stage fright an impenetrable wall, the thought of standing alone, exposed, with all eyes on her, was simply too overwhelming. Mrs. Davis, though disappointed, respected Chloe's decision, understanding that pushing too hard might extinguish the fragile flame of her talent. Meanwhile, a different kind of buzz was electrifying Nashville. Julian Thorne, the pop sensation, made a grand arrival in the city a few days before the talent show. His presence was a media circus, local news outlets clamoring to cover his every move. He gave interviews with his characteristic blend of charm and condescension, talking grandly about discovering new talent, while simultaneously making thinly veiled, snide remarks about amateur hour and the lack of true artistry he often encountered in local scenes. His words were a thinly veiled jab at the very community that had birthed his career, a community he now seemed to disdain. One late night, as Mark was diligently working his shift at the diner, wiping down counters and pouring endless cups of coffee, the bell above the door chimed, announcing a new arrival. In walked Julian Thorne, flanked by a small, bustling entourage. Mark recognized him instantly. The years had added a few lines to Julian's face, a touch more polish to his demeanor, but the arrogant swagger was unmistakable. Julian, however, didn't seem to recognize Mark, his eyes sweeping over the diner with a look of mild disdain, as if he'd accidentally stumbled into a forgotten relic from a bygone era. Julian, true to his public persona, was demanding and rude to the staff. He complained loudly about the coffee being too weak, the lighting being too dim, the music being too loud. His voice, usually smooth and melodic in his songs, was now a grating, entitled whine. Mark, ever the professional, kept his head down, serving Julian and his group with a stoic politeness, his face carefully neutral. He just wanted to get through the shift, to earn his pay, to go home to Chloe. He certainly didn't want any trouble with this blast from his past. As Mark delivered Julian's third complaint-riddled cup of coffee, Julian finally looked at him, truly looked at him. A flicker of recognition, faint but undeniable, crossed his face. His eyes narrowed slightly, a ghost of a memory stirring. He remembered Mark, not just from the old days, but perhaps even a specific negative interaction, a moment where their paths had crossed and Julian had asserted his perceived superiority. A condescending smirk spread across Julian's lips. "Well, well, well," he drawled, his voice dripping with mock surprise. "Mark, isn't it? Still flipping burgers, I see. Some things never change." The implication was clear. Mark was a failure, stuck in a dead-end job, while Julian soared. The words stung, a sharp, unexpected blow to Mark's carefully constructed composure. His jaw tightened, but he met Julian's gaze with a quiet dignity. "I'm proud to provide for my daughter," Mark replied, his voice calm, steady, betraying none of the anger simmering beneath the surface. "It's honest work," Julian merely scoffed, waving a dismissive hand, clearly unimpressed by Mark's quiet pride. He found Mark's response pathetic, a justification for mediocrity. Julian, still wanting to needle Mark, to assert his dominance, leaned in slightly, a predatory glint in his eye. "Oh, your daughter," he mused, as if just remembering Chloe's existence. "She's in that little school talent show, isn't she?" Mark nodded, a knot forming in his stomach. "She's in the choir," he confirmed, suddenly wary of Julian's intentions. Julian's smirk widened, taking on a more sinister edge. "Tell you what, Mark," he said, his voice laced with false generosity. "If she's any good, maybe I'll let her sing a solo. But," he added, his eyes hardening, Only if I pick the song. He leaned back, a smug expression plastered on his face, clearly intending this as a humiliating challenge, a trap designed to expose Chloe's amateurism and, by extension, Mark's continued failure in life. He fully expected the child to crash and burn, thereby confirming his own prejudiced view of Mark and anyone associated with him. Mark was conflicted, a storm of emotions raging within him. His first instinct was to protect Chloe from this venomous man, to shield her from the public humiliation Julian clearly intended. He didn't want his daughter to be a pawn in Julian's cruel game. But then a tiny, almost imperceptible thought flickered. What if this, despite Julian's malicious intent, was a chance for Chloe? A chance for her to step out of her shell, to truly be heard. He quickly dismissed the thought, the risk too great, the potential for pain too high. He resolved to keep Julian's cynical offer, a secret from Chloe, to protect her innocence and her fragile confidence. He would find a way to ensure she was not subjected to Julian's malice. He would shield her, as he always had. He would carry this burden alone. The day of the talent show arrived, heralded by a nervous flutter in Chloe's stomach and a palpable tension in the air. The school auditorium, usually a cavernous space echoing with the sounds of children, was now packed to capacity, a sea of eager faces and hushed anticipation. Julian Thorne, the much-touted celebrity judge, was seated prominently at the judges' table, a figure of polished disdain. He looked bored, his gaze sweeping over the audience with an air of self-importance that seemed to chill the very atmosphere. Mark sat in the audience, a silent sentinel of support, his heart a drum of anxiety for Chloe. He clutched his hands together, his knuckles white, a silent prayer forming on his lips that Chloe would simply get through her performance without incident. The school choir, a colorful assembly of nervous children, took to the stage. Chloe, a tiny figure among them, blended into the group, her shyness a familiar cloak. The music began, a cheerful, upbeat number that filled the hall. As the choir sang, Chloe's voice, though still, somewhat reserved, shone through the collective sound, a clear, sweet tone that cut through the other voices. Mrs. Davis, standing discreetly in the wings, caught Chloe's eye and gave her an encouraging nod, a silent acknowledgement of her talent. Chloe, for a brief moment, allowed herself to relax, finding comfort in the anonymity of the group. Just as the final notes of the choir's performance faded, and polite applause rippled through the audience, an unexpected and jarring intervention occurred. Julian Thorne, with an air of theatricality, rose from his seat and strode purposefully to the microphone, an uninvited interruption to the flow of the show. He tapped the mic, a sound that reverberated loudly through the auditorium, silencing the lingering applause. His voice, amplified and dripping with a practiced, patronizing charm, filled the space. "Well," he began, a slow, deliberate smile playing on his lips, "I must say I was mildly impressed. Mildly, but—" He paused, letting the word hang in the air. "I still feel there's a lot of undeveloped talent lurking in these halls. A lot of potential, perhaps, but not quite ready for the big leagues." Then his eyes, sharp and calculating, scanned the choir. They landed directly on Chloe, singling her out from the group. A cruel glint entered his gaze. "I hear there's a young lady in this choir," he announced, his voice carrying an unmistakable mocking tone, with a very quiet voice. A voice so quiet, one might wonder if she has what it takes to truly perform, to command a stage. He paused again, letting the tension build, the spotlight of his malice now firmly fixed on Chloe. "I dare you, Chloe," he continued, his voice dropping to a theatrical whisper. that still carried to every corner of the hall, to sing a solo right now, a song of my choosing. His smile widened, a predatory flash. He then named a song, a notoriously difficult power ballad, Unchained Melody, a classic known for its soaring, emotional melody, and, more importantly, its incredibly high, sustained notes that challenged even the most seasoned vocalists. His tone left no doubt. He was setting her up for a spectacular failure, an act of public humiliation designed to crush her spirit and, perhaps, to spite Mark. Chloe froze. The blood drained from her face, leaving her ashen and terrified. Her worst nightmare, the very scenario she had desperately tried to avoid, was unfolding before her, amplified by the celebrity's cruel pronouncement. Her eyes, wide with panic, darted to her dad in the audience, tears already welling up, blurring her vision. The auditorium, which moments ago had been a bustling space, now felt like a suffocating cage, every eye fixed on her. Mark, witnessing his daughter's terror and Julian's blatant cruelty, surged forward, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. Fury, raw and incandescent, coursed through him. He was ready to leap onto the stage, to confront Julian, to tear him limb from limb if necessary. But just as he started to rise, Mrs. Davis, who had rushed from the wings, subtly but firmly placed a hand on his arm, shaking her head almost imperceptibly. Her eyes, meeting his, conveyed a clear message. Intervening now would only make things worse for Chloe, turning her into a spectacle of her father's anger rather than a victim of Julian's. Mark, through his blinding rage, understood the silent plea and reluctantly sank back into his seat. His fists clenched, his body trembling with suppressed fury. Mrs. Davis, seeing Chloe's distress and Mark's barely contained outrage, bravely stepped forward, attempting to intervene. She approached Julian, her voice calm but firm. "Mr. Thorne," she began, her gaze unwavering, "Chloe isn't prepared for a solo. She hasn't rehearsed that song, and she's not comfortable with a spontaneous performance." She tried to appeal to his professionalism, to his humanity, however faint it might be. But Julian merely waved her off, a dismissive flick of his wrist. "A true artist," he scoffed, his voice laced with contempt, "is always prepared, Mrs. Davis, or they're not an artist at all." He turned his back to her, his message clear. He then addressed the audience, his voice ringing with a manipulative edge. "Look," he declared, "if our young, aspiring talent here doesn't have the courage to step up, then I'm afraid I'll have to declare this whole show a disappointment, a waste of my valuable time." He made it unequivocally clear. Chloe's refusal would not just be her personal failure, but the failure of the entire event, casting a shadow over all the other children's hard work. Chloe, caught between the crushing weight of public expectation and the burning shame of Julian's challenge, looked at her dad again. She saw his anger. Yes, but beneath it, she also saw his silent encouragement, a deep, unwavering love that transcended the fear. In that moment, something shifted within her. A flicker of defiance, a spark of inherited strength, ignited. She remembered the stories her dad had told her about her mom's beautiful voice, her unwavering spirit. She thought of her dad's quiet sacrifices, his relentless strength in the face of adversity. She took a deep, shaky breath, and then another, drawing courage from an unseen wellspring. Every fiber of her being screamed to run, to hide, but the memory of her parents, their music, their resilience, held her grounded. With a newfound resolve, a quiet determination hardening her delicate features, she slowly, deliberately, began to walk towards the microphone, taking one brave step after another, Into the harsh glare of the spotlight, a profound silence descended upon the auditorium, thick and heavy, punctuated only by the soft, almost imperceptible hum of the sound system. Julian Thorne, a self-satisfied smirk still playing on his lips, leaned back in his chair at the judges' table, his arms casually folded across his chest. He fully anticipated the impending disaster, the public unraveling of a timid child, a spectacle he had meticulously orchestrated. Beside him, Mrs. Davis, the music teacher, wrung her hands, her face a mask of profound concern, her gaze fixed on Chloe, who now stood alone, a tiny figure dwarfed by the imposing microphone stand. The first few hesitant piano chords of Unchained Melody began to fill the vast space, a familiar, poignant melody that felt almost cruel in its beauty, given the circumstances. Chloe's lips parted, and her first notes emerged, barely a whisper, fragile and trembling. The audience held its collective breath, a tangible wave of apprehension washing over the room. It sounded exactly as Julian had predicted, a voice on the verge of cracking, a performance destined for failure. A few sympathetic murmurs rippled through the crowd, quickly hushed by the sheer tension of the moment. But then, something extraordinary began to happen. As Chloe continued to sing, her eyes, previously wide with terror, slowly closed. It was as if, shutting out the intimidating faces of the audience, the smug satisfaction on Julian Thorne's face allowed her to retreat into an inner world, a sanctuary where only the music existed. With each successive line, her voice, initially so meek, began to gain an astonishing strength, a clarity that cut through the silence. The raw emotion, the vulnerability, slowly transformed into an unexpected depth, a resonance that seemed to vibrate not just in the air, but in the very souls of those listening. It was no longer just a child singing. It was a voice channeling something far older, far deeper. The song progressed, building towards its iconic, challenging climax. Those impossibly high, sustained notes that were the hallmark of Unchained Melody, notes that had felled countless professional singers. Julian Thorne, who had settled back into his arrogant slouch, suddenly stiffened. His eyes, which had been idly scanning the audience, snapped back to Chloe. He saw her take a deep, steadying breath, her small chest expanding, and then she reached them. Instead of cracking, instead of faltering, her voice soared. It was a sound of breathtaking purity and power, hitting every single note with an astonishing precision, holding them with an incredible, unwavering control. It was a performance that defied her tender age, a display of vocal prowess that was simply beyond belief for a 10-year-old. Julian Thorne's smug expression, which had been so firmly etched on his face moments before, slowly, imperceptibly, began to melt away. Disbelief flickered across his features, followed by an expression of outright shock. He sat up abruptly, his jaw slack, his practiced composure utterly shattered. He couldn't believe what he was hearing. He, a seasoned professional who had spent decades in the music industry, recognized the sheer difficulty of those notes. He knew, intimately, the immense vocal control, the breath support, the emotional stamina required to execute them flawlessly. He, Julian Thorne, the arrogant pop star, couldn't hit those notes with that kind of effortless grace anymore. He was witnessing something truly remarkable, something that challenged his entire cynical worldview. The audience, initially holding its breath in fearful anticipation, was now utterly mesmerized. A collective gasp, then a profound silence, save for Chloe's soaring voice, enveloped the room. Parents, who had come expecting a typical school talent show, found themselves openly weeping, tears streaming down their faces, touched by the raw beauty and unexpected power of Chloe's voice. Mrs. Davis, her earlier concern replaced by an expression of pure, unadulterated pride and awe, simply stood in the wings, a single tear tracing a path down her cheek. Mark, in the audience, was no longer trembling with suppressed rage. His anger had dissolved, replaced by an overwhelming wave of emotion. Tears, hot and uncontrollable, streamed down his face as he watched his daughter. He wasn't just seeing Chloe. He was seeing Sarah, her spirit alive in their child, her dreams finally taking flight. He was seeing his own sacrifices, his own buried dreams, vindicated in this extraordinary moment. Chloe wasn't merely executing a technically perfect rendition of a difficult song. She was pouring her entire being into it. Every note resonated with a profound emotional depth, a silent narrative of her young life. It was a heartfelt tribute to her late mother, Sarah, whose love for music pulsed through Chloe's veins. It was a powerful testament to her father's unwavering sacrifice, his quiet strength that had sustained them through unimaginable hardship. And in that moment, it was a declaration of her own emerging strength, her blossoming courage, a quiet assertion of her individuality against the backdrop of Julian Thorne's cruel challenge. The shyness, the fear, the insecurity, all dissolved into the pure, unadulterated passion of her song. Finally, she reached the very last note. It was a powerful, clear, and sustained crescendo, a note that hung in the air long after the backing track faded, reverberating through the auditorium, a testament to her triumph. The silence that followed was not of apprehension, but of stunned reverence. Then, as if a dam had broken, the auditorium erupted. The applause was deafening, a thunderous wave that shook the very foundations of the building. People were on their feet cheering, whistling, shouting her name. Strangers embraced, united by the shared experience of witnessing something truly magical. Many were still wiping away tears, their hearts overflowing with emotion. Chloe, still a little stunned by the raw power she had just unleashed, her eyes now open, looked out at the sea of ecstatic faces. Her own face was a complex mix of lingering fear, profound relief, and an undeniable, burgeoning triumph. She had faced her greatest fear, and she had not only survived, but soared. Julian Thorne, still visibly stunned by the sheer power and unexpected brilliance of Chloe's performance, slowly rose from his seat. The microphone, which he had used moments ago to issue his cruel challenge, was still clutched in his hand, now seeming almost a prop in his own unexpected defeat. He cleared his throat, a dry, uncomfortable sound that barely registered above the lingering echoes of the standing ovation. His usual confident swagger had evaporated, replaced by an awkwardness that was utterly alien to his public persona. He struggled for words, a rare and telling moment for a man accustomed to commanding attention with effortless ease. The practiced arrogance, the condescending smirk that was his trademark, had completely vanished, leaving behind a bewildered vulnerability. He tried to sound professional, to reclaim some semblance of control, but the tremor in his voice betrayed him. I have to say, he began, his voice a little hoarse. I was wrong, completely wrong. He paused, taking a deep breath, as if the admission itself was physically painful. That was truly exceptional. I haven't heard a voice like that in years. The emotion, the control, and those notes. He shook his head slowly, a genuine look of awe on his face. I couldn't hit those notes myself anymore, not with that kind of purity. He looked genuinely humbled. A transformation so complete it was almost unbelievable. The crowd, still buzzing with Chloe's performance, watched him. A collective anticipation building. Was this an apology? A genuine acknowledgement? Julian, ever the opportunist, ever the businessman, quickly pivoted. He had just witnessed a raw, undeniable talent, a potential gold mine. His mind, always calculating, immediately shifted from humiliation to exploitation. He saw not a child, but a massive talent opportunity, a new star to polish and profit from. He extended his hand, a gesture of faux generosity, trying to reclaim his position of power, to dictate the narrative. "Chloe," he announced, his voice regaining a touch of its former confidence, now laced with a new kind of predatory charm. "I want to offer you a recording contract. Right here, right now. My label. We'll make you a star. The biggest star this town has ever seen." He looked around the room as if daring anyone to challenge his sudden benevolence, his sudden claim to her future. But before Chloe could even process the dizzying offer, a figure moved from the audience, purposeful and determined. It was Mark. His face, still streaked with tears of pride and relief for his daughter, was now set in a mask of steely resolve. He walked steadily towards the stage, his eyes locked on Julian Thorne. The crowd parted respectfully, sensing the gravity of the moment. Mark reached the stage, and with a protective instinct that was both fierce and tender, he gently placed an arm around Chloe's trembling shoulders. He looked Julian Thorne directly in the eye, his gaze unwavering, his voice low, but carrying an undeniable weight. "Julian," Mark began, his voice resonating with a quiet authority that silenced the murmuring crowd. "You stood up here tonight and tried to humiliate my daughter. You tried to break her spirit, to crush her confidence, all for your own amusement." He tightened his arm around Chloe, who leaned into his embrace, finding strength in his presence. "You don't deserve her talent. You don't deserve to be anywhere near it." The words hung in the air, a stark public rejection of Julian's sudden change of heart. Mark then added, his voice tinged with a bitterness born of years of simmering resentment. "We remember how you treated people back in the day, Julian, how you stepped on others to get where you are. You haven't changed much, have you? You just found a new way to try and exploit someone." Chloe, still overwhelmed by the whirlwind of emotions, looked from Julian Thorne's shocked face to her dad's steadfast gaze. In her father's eyes, she saw not just love, but a quiet strength, an integrity that Julian Thorne could never possess. She thought of her mother, of the music they had shared, of the purity of their passion. The recording contract, the promise of stardom, suddenly seemed hollow, tainted by the source. She shook her head, a small, almost imperceptible movement, but firm. "No, thank you," she said softly, her voice still a little shaky, but clear, carrying a newfound conviction. "I want to sing because I love it, because it comes from my heart, not because someone makes me, and not because someone wants to use me." The auditorium erupted once more, but this time, the cheers were for Mark and Chloe's refusal, a resounding endorsement of their integrity over Julian Thorne's opportunistic offer. People stood and applauded, not for a performance, but for a moment of profound moral victory. Julian Thorne was left standing alone on the stage, the microphone still in his hand, his face a mortified scarlet. The public rejection, the humiliation he had intended for Chloe, had boomeranged back onto him with brutal force. He looked visibly embarrassed, his grand gesture of patronage utterly rebuffed. As Julian Thorne stood there, a solitary figure in the glare of the stage lights, Mrs. Davis, the music teacher, stepped forward. Her face was beaming with pride. She gently pulled Chloe into a warm embrace, whispering words of encouragement and telling her how incredibly proud she was. She then met Mark's gaze, offering him a knowing, appreciative look, a silent acknowledgement of his courage and his unwavering dedication to his daughter. The true artistry, the true spirit of music, had won, not through manipulation, but through authenticity and heart. Julian Thorne, his face a mask of mortified rage, quickly retreated from the stage, his exit punctuated by the lingering cheers for Chloe and Mark. The local news reporters, who had been present to cover the celebrity judge's appearance, were now scrambling, their microphones thrust forward, eager to capture the raw, unscripted drama that had just unfolded. This was far more sensational than any pre-planned soundbite. Chloe, still somewhat dazed by the whirlwind of emotions and the sudden spotlight, found herself surrounded by a throng of well-wishers and curious journalists. Mark, ever vigilant, stepped forward, his arms still firmly around her, shielding her from the intrusive questions and guiding her gently but firmly away from the clamor. He navigated them through the congratulatory crowd, his priority to get Chloe to a quiet, safe space where she could process everything. Later that evening, the small apartment that had always been their sanctuary felt different. It was filled not with the usual quiet hum of their daily lives, but with a palpable energy, a residual vibration from the extraordinary events of the night. Chloe and Mark sat on their worn sofa, the silence between them comfortable, filled with unspoken understanding. Chloe, still dressed in her talent show outfit, finally looked at her dad, her eyes wide, with a mixture of exhaustion and exhilaration. She admitted, her voice soft, "Dad, I was so scared. My legs were shaking so much I thought I would fall." She paused, a small, thoughtful frown creasing her brow. "But then, when I closed my eyes, it was like Mom was there, like she was singing with me." Mark's heart swelled. He reached out and gently squeezed her hand, his own eyes a little misty. "She was, sweetie. I know she was, and she would be so incredibly proud of you." "I know I am," he told her, his voice thick with emotion. How he had never been prouder. How her courage and her voice had moved not just him, but an entire auditorium. It was then, in the quiet intimacy of their home, that Mark felt it was finally time to reveal a deeper truth, a past wound that Julian Thorne's presence had reopened. He took a deep breath, knowing this conversation was long overdue. "Chloe," he began, his voice dropping to a more serious tone, "there's something about Julian Thorne that you need to understand. It's not just about his arrogance tonight." He watched her carefully, gauging her readiness to hear a painful chapter of their family's history. He explained that Julian Thorne wasn't just a rude, self-important celebrity. He was a man who had built his career, in part, by stepping on others, by taking advantage of the vulnerable. Mark told her how Julian used to frequent the same struggling music venues as he and Sarah, always observing, always listening, always looking for an angle. "He used to steal songs, Chloe," Mark said, his voice laced with a quiet anger that still simmered after all these years. "Or ideas, melodies, from other struggling musicians, from people who didn't have the connections or the money to fight back." He paused, his gaze drifting to a dusty corner of the room where his old guitar rested, a silent monument to his unfulfilled dreams. "Your mom and I, we worked on a song together years ago, before you were born. It was a beautiful melody, one of her favorites. We spent weeks on it, perfecting it, dreaming about what it could be." He sighed, a heavy sound. "Julian heard us playing it once, At a small open mic night, he was just lurking in the back, like a shadow. Chloe listened intently, her eyes wide, absorbing every word. She remembered snippets of her dad's past, vague allusions to shared dreams with her mom, but never this specific, painful betrayal. And then, she prompted, sensing the weight of the story. Mark nodded slowly. And then, a few years later, after he got his big break, Julian Thorne released a song, a huge hit. It was called Echoes of Love. He looked at Chloe, his expression grim. The melody, Chloe. It was almost identical to ours, the one your mom and I had poured our hearts into. It was our melody. Mark then walked over to a small cluttered shelf, reaching behind a stack of old books. He pulled out a worn, unlabeled cassette tape, its plastic casing scratched and faded with age. "This is it," he said, blowing a layer of dust off the tape. "Our demo, the only copy we ever made." He carefully inserted it into an ancient cassette player, its buttons yellowed with time. The player whirred to life, and then a faint, slightly distorted melody began to fill the room. It was melancholic, hauntingly beautiful, and undeniably familiar. Chloe listened, her eyes widening in recognition. It was the core melody of Julian Thorne's famous song, the one that had launched him into superstardom. It was unmistakably the same. "We had no proof, Chloe," Mark explained, his voice tinged with the old helplessness. "No official registration, no money for lawyers to fight a big record label. And then, after your mom got sick, I just couldn't fight it anymore. All my energy, all my focus, went into taking care of her and you." He looked at the tape player, then back at Chloe. "That's part of why Julian was so condescending to me tonight. He recognized me. He probably feared I might expose him, might bring up the past." Chloe's understanding deepened. It wasn't just arrogance that drove Julian Thorne. It was fear. Fear of being exposed, of his carefully constructed facade crumbling. The malice in his challenge, the desire to see her fail, now made perfect sense. It was a preemptive strike, a way to belittle the daughter of the man he had wronged, to ensure their voices, their music, remained silenced. A new fire ignited in Chloe's eyes, replacing the earlier fear and shyness. It was a spark of defiance, a quiet resolve that mirrored her father's strength and her mother's passion. She looked at her dad, no longer a timid child, but a young woman finding her voice in more ways than one. "We don't need him, Dad," she declared, her voice clear and firm, echoing the conviction that had permeated her performance earlier that night. "We don't need his label, or his contracts, or his approval. We can do this ourselves. We can write our own music." "Our music," she pointed to his old guitar. "You can play again. We can play together." Mark looked at his daughter, truly seeing her for the first time in this new light. He saw Sarah's fierce spirit, her unwavering belief in their music, now reflected in Chloe. He saw his own long-buried dreams, the ones he had sacrificed for his family, suddenly rekindled, brought back to life by his daughter's courage. A slow smile spread across his face, a smile that reached his eyes for the first time in years. He walked over to the dusty guitar, gently picking it up. He hadn't touched it in so long, but as his fingers brushed the strings, a familiar warmth spread through him. The music, their music, was finally coming home. 1 year later, the small apartment that had once felt quiet and often melancholic was now a vibrant hub of creativity and sound. A montage of their lives unfolded, painting a picture of renewed purpose and shared passion. Mark, his hands no longer calloused from endless diner shifts, but from hours spent strumming chords, was patiently teaching Chloe the intricacies of the guitar. Her small fingers, once hesitant, now moved with increasing dexterity across the fretboard, mirroring the melodies that flowed effortlessly from her lips. The air was often thick with the sweet, sometimes clumsy harmony of their voices, a symphony of rediscovered dreams. Their apartment, once a space of quiet survival, had transformed into a sanctuary of musical exploration, filled with the rich, resonant tones of Mark's rediscovered guitar and Chloe's blossoming voice. They spent countless evenings hunched over notebooks, lyrics scrawled in the margins, melodies hummed into voice recorders, building a repertoire that was uniquely theirs. Chloe, no longer the shy, withdrawn girl who sang in whispers, began to tentatively step onto local stages. Her first performances were at small open mic nights in cozy Nashville coffee shops, the kind of intimate venues where true talent often first takes root. At first, a hint of her old shyness lingered, a slight tremor in her voice, a flicker of apprehension in her eyes. But with each note sung, with every chord struck by her father beside her, her confidence blossomed. Mark, guitar in hand, would stand just off stage, his presence a silent anchor, his gaze a constant source of encouragement. He would join her on stage for a few songs, their voices blending in a harmony that spoke of shared history and renewed hope. They quickly gained a small but dedicated following in the Nashville independent music scene. People were drawn not just to Chloe's ethereal voice and Mark's soulful guitar, but to the genuine, heartfelt stories woven into their music. Stories of resilience, love, and the quiet triumph of the human spirit. One ordinary Tuesday night at a bustling coffee shop, known for its eclectic live music, a casual video of Chloe singing one of their original songs was captured by a patron's phone. The impromptu recording, raw and unfiltered, somehow perfectly encapsulated the magic of her performance. The video, uploaded without much expectation, began to spread. First, it was shared among friends, then within local music circles, and soon, it exploded across social media. Her unique voice, with its haunting purity and emotional depth, coupled with the compelling backstory of her talent show performance against Julian Thorne, resonated deeply with millions. The internet, in its unpredictable way, had found its new darling. Comments poured in, praising her talent, her courage, and the authentic connection she shared with her father. The viral moment wasn't manufactured. It was organic, a testament to genuine artistry rising above the noise. Suddenly, their phone began to ring with increasing frequency. Independent record labels, drawn to the authenticity of their story and the undeniable talent showcased in the viral video, started reaching out. Managers, visionaries, in the often cutthroat music industry, saw not just a fleeting internet sensation, but a long-term artistic force. These weren't the corporate giants Julian Thorne represented, but smaller, more ethical labels, known for nurturing artists and respecting their creative integrity. Chloe and Mark approached these new opportunities with caution, their past experiences making them wary of exploitation. They carefully vetted each offer, prioritizing artistic control and genuine partnership over fleeting fame or massive advances. They chose a small, artist-friendly label that understood their vision, a company that respected their shared journey and promised to support Chloe's growth as an artist, with Mark as her steadfast collaborator and co-writer. As Chloe and Mark's star began its slow, steady ascent, Julian Thorne's once unshakable career started to falter. News snippets, often accompanied by unflattering photos, painted a picture of decline. His most recent album, released with much fanfare, had flopped commercially and critically. His arrogant persona, once perceived as charmingly eccentric by some, now seemed outdated and off-putting to a public increasingly valuing authenticity. The talent show incident, widely reported and dissected online, had cast a long shadow over his reputation. Whispers and rumors of his past behavior, his alleged song-stealing, his treatment of struggling artists, began to surface with renewed vigor. People, emboldened by Chloe's story, started to openly question the originality of some of his older, most celebrated hits, scrutinizing their melodies with a critical ear. The tide had turned. Then came the full circle moment, a quiet yet profound act of reclamation. Chloe and Mark, under their new independent label, released their first album. It was a collection of songs that spoke of hope, struggle, and the enduring power of family. One particular track, a beautiful, heartfelt ballad, quickly became a fan favorite. It was a haunting melody, haunting, familiar, yet entirely new, infused with a depth of emotion that brought listeners to tears. The song subtly incorporated the very melody Julian Thorne had stolen years ago, but it was transformed, elevated, imbued with their own unique artistic signature. The credits for the song read simply, "Written by Chloe and Mark." It was a quiet, dignified reclaiming of their legacy, a musical justice served without fanfare or bitterness, but with pure, undeniable talent. It was their melody, brought back home, made beautiful again. Chloe was no longer just Mark's daughter, nor was she merely the viral sensation who defied a pop star. She was Chloe, a rising star in her own right, her voice a beacon of authenticity in a world often dominated by manufactured fame. And by her side, not just as a proud single dad, but as her trusted collaborator and fellow musician, was Mark. His guitar, once gathering dust, was now an extension of his soul, his melodies intertwining with Chloe's, their shared music, a testament to their unbreakable bond. They were successful, not in the terms of celebrity magazine covers or stadium tours, but in a way that truly mattered. They were creating art that resonated, staying true to themselves, and most importantly, they were happy. The echoes of a stolen melody had finally found their true harmonious home,